Right. Hey guys, me Anthony back again with the video. Here we're gonna react to the strange death of manual transmission. Yeah, there's a reason for it. I remember when I first started taking my driver's lessons, the first thing I asked the driving teacher was, can I learn how to drive a manual? And they said no, because they wouldn't really make manual transmissions anymore. So yeah, I never learned how to drive manual. I did my driver's test, only automatic. I started wondering, how come people don't do it anymore? So yeah, like recently I started wondering that, and then I found this. So, yeah, here we go. Original in the description. And don't worry, I'm about doing the Dark Ages. I'm going to play that. It might take a little while, but I'm going to. Don't worry. So yeah.
For close to a century, the manual transmission was really the thing that connected the driver and the machine, mechanical and visceral. It was how many of us learned to drive, how we raced, how we...
Sorry. What the hell is this for?
For close... For close to a century, the manual transmission was really the thing that connected the driver and the machine, mechanical and visceral. It was how many of us learned to drive, how we raced, how we felt in control behind the wheel. Despite the fact that automatic transmissions began making their way into production cars around the middle of the 20th century, in the 1970s, still almost half of all cars sold featured manual transmissions. By the 90s, that number was down closer to 25%, but today, despite manuals being readily available in places like the UK, less than 2% of new cars sold in the US have manual gearboxes. This shouldn't come as a shock though. Automated is better, right? We don't just want our cars to have automatic transmissions, we want the car to literally drive itself. Well, not all of us. I think there's more to the death of the manual transmission than what meets the eye, and I also believe that there's still hope for our kids and grandkids to get to experience the automobile in this tangible way beyond just, driving simulators. So let's dive in and look at the strange death of the manual transmission. Alright, before we go any further though, I've got to tell you about this awesome app called Upside, which is today's video sponsor. Now if you drive, and I know you do, this is one of the easiest ways to get real cash back on stuff you're already buying, like gas, but also groceries and restaurants. On average, people using Upside are getting back around $280 a year, which could easily cover, a few oil changes, maybe even part of your insurance, or even the next mod that you've been eyeing for your build. Now let me show you how this works. It is dead simple. There are over 100,000 gas stations, grocery stores, and restaurants listed.
Battery's dead.
Sorry.
In the app, you can just download the free Upside app, make an account in basically no time, link your debit or credit card, and look around back. It's literally that simple. Just you're done. Straightforward. To download your first tank. Thanks to Upside Mission dates back for sponsoring this video. Let's get back into the video. The concept of the manual transmission dates back to the dawn of the automobile in the late 19th century. The very earliest cars, like Carl Benz's motor wagon of 1886, featured very rudimentary gear systems. These early gearboxes were unsynchronized and difficult to operate. In 1894, a French manufacturer by the name of something I probably will not pronounce right, developed a 3-speed manual transmission, laying the groundwork for the basic configuration that we recognize today. Throughout the early 20th century, the manual transmission continued to evolve. The introduction of the sliding gear transmission allowed for more flexible control over speed and torque, but it did require precise timing and technique, as gears could grind easily if not properly engaged. In 1928, Cadillac introduced the synchronized manual transmission, or synchromesh, which really simplified gear changes by matching gear speed internally, and this really improved the overall driving experience as this system was widely adopted by other manufacturers going forward. The manual transmission reached a sort of golden age in terms of popularity in the mid-20th century, though significant advancements to it would come later. During the 1940s through really the 70s, manual gearboxes gearboxes were pretty much standard in most vehicles. Automatic transmissions were still new, they were expensive, and they were often unreliable. So manuals were kind of the default choice. They were simpler, they were cheaper to produce and maintain, they offered better fuel efficiency and performance. This era saw the rise of high-performance cars, especially in the United States and Europe. Iconic vehicles like the Ford Mustang or the Camaro or the Porsche 911. For these cars, their manual transmissions and the experience that they offered alongside their great iconic engines really became key to their driving appeal. The manual gearbox was preferred in most driving scenarios because it gave the driver the most control. In motorsports, manual transmissions were essential. From Formula One to rally racing, a driver's ability to extract the most from their vehicles would be the difference often between winning and not winning. Advancements in transmission technology over the decades improved the manual gearbox dramatically. Gearboxes became more refined, shifts became smoother, and the number of gears increased from 3 and 4 in early models to 5 and 6 in the 80s and 90s, and even 7-speed manuals. But as manual transmissions got better, automatic transmissions were also improving, maybe even more rapidly. Innovations, things like torque converters, planetary gear sets, and even electronic controls made automatics more efficient and more responsive. In the 90s and 2000s, we saw things like CVTs, or continuously variable transmissions, and also dual clutch transmissions introduced, which offered faster and more efficient gear changes than any human could manage manually. It was quickly becoming clear that the automatic transmission was on its way to replacing the manual in almost every category. But despite these improvements, manual transmissions were still the way to go for both purists but also budget-conscious buyers. In some regions like Europe and Asia, manual gearboxes continued to dominate well into the 2000s. Because of high fuel prices and stricter emission standards, they were just practical choices really. By the 2010s, the manual transmission was really on the decline, especially in North America. And I think there are quite a few reasons for this fall in popularity. It's not really one simple thing. First, there's no denying that modern automatic and DCT systems have just gotten to a point where, for many, there's no point in owning a manual. They're faster, they're more efficient, and more reliable than ever before. For many drivers, the convenience of an automatic outweighed the perceived control of a manual, especially as people sit stuck in traffic. For younger generations, there's less interest in driving at all, let alone learning to drive a manual. Things like ride-sharing service and just general urbanization, the rise of more autonomous vehicles has really diminished the need for any of these traditional driving skills. As demand has decreased, manufacturers, I think, feel that there's no incentive to continue offering manual options, especially in places where people aren't really buying them. Developing and certifying manual variants of new models just kind of makes little sense to them. I will say, though, that manufacturers will act like the reason they don't make manual transmission cars is just because of a lack of interest from consumers, but it's their fault also. The way cars are marketed has had a huge impact on the industry in this way. SUVs, trucks, vans, sedans, they're presented to us as appealing primarily for their ease, their luxury, their performance, their technological sophistication, not so much for the driving experience itself. And if promotions do mention driving experience, they're usually lying because most of these new vehicles are entirely stale and lifeless to drive. I think that also in some ways the rise of EVs has dealt kind of a final blow to the manual transmission. EVs do not require multi-gear transmissions usually, as electric motors provide torque across a broad range of speeds. For us in the States, in terms of manual options, this means that, sure, there's the Miata, there's a few Porsches, one BMW, the Camaro and the Mustang, and I think the Bronco can be had with manuals. There's a couple sedans and a couple hatchbacks, but mostly it's just kind of the sports car options. There are no trucks. You can't get a simple basic manual work truck. I think that the Nissan Versa is the only budget car that comes with a manual option for us in the States. So if you want a car with a manual transmission that really offers a fun, dynamic driving experience and you don't want to spend $40K or more, you pretty much have to get a Miata or get something used. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons why cars and sports cars from the 90s are so popular right now. That is the way to go for enthusiasts who are looking for this kind of experience. You could go get a Chevy S10, you could go get a Toyota Corolla. I mean, you can pretty much get anything you want as a manual from the 90s. Now, to kind of bring this all together, I really think that there is a simple, sort of overarching concept that gets at why the manual transmission just doesn't appeal to drivers here in America. And before I say this, I do think it's important to note that automatics do have their place. I don't think everybody should drive a manual, or that you're not really driving, if you're driving an automatic. What I do think is that the incredible decline of manual cars here in the US is kind of a symptom of something bigger. People don't really value driving in the way that they used to. The actual experience, the fun of going for a drive is kind of lost on people. Whether it's a Sunday afternoon cruise with the family, late night gas station run, a back road jaunt, a road trip across the country with no plan in mind. This is all but gone, and it's sad because enthusiasts in other countries really envy the open road that we have here in the States. We take it for granted here. If people don't value the experience of driving, automation and creature comforts are elevated above all else, and that's just so evident when you look at what's available here in the States for new vehicles. And so we're left with a pretty stark landscape, one where the manual transmission is no longer the default or even common. But despite all this, I don't believe the story of the manual is quite finished. I really think there's a growing number of people who don't view cars as simply appliances. People are realizing once again that there can be this emotional connection with cars. As my generation, kids growing up in the 90s, we're kind of the last group of people who grew up with cars that had any sort of soul. If you were born this century, you could have easily gone your whole life without ever having been around a car with a manual transmission. While the mainstream market is probably going to continue its march towards automation, EVs, driverless tech, there is a passionate corner of the automotive world that still wants that connection, the raw, analog nature of a manual gearbox, that feeling of being directly linked to the machine and to the road and to your own senses. That can't be replicated by paddles or software. There's no algorithm for the satisfaction of a perfect heel-toe downshift, or the rhythm that you fall into when you're just moving through the gear.
So can I just say something about driverless cars, since you brought it up? I'm pretty sure the only reasonable use for a driverless car is any jobs that require driving somewhere, like driving a semi truck or a taxi or something like that. Yeah. Mainly just stuff that's really long distance. Delivery driving. That's pretty sure that's the only job that could actually be replaced by driverless cars. Yeah. That's just a thought. I think they'll
Gears on a twisty road, or just the fun of learning how to drive a stick shift.
Yeah.
And car makers know this. That's why some, like Mazda, Porsche, Toyota, and even BMW, have fought to keep manuals alive in some sense. These are often not the highest volume cars, and they're not the easiest to justify from a business perspective, but they're there, and more importantly, they often sell out. The manual Supra is a good example. That wasn't just a token gesture, it was something that enthusiasts asked for, and Toyota delivered on it. The GR86 and Miata still exist because people buy them for the driving experience, not just for the spec sheet. So that demand, however niche, is real. Looking ahead, I think we'll continue to see manuals exist in two forms, as sort of cult icons among enthusiasts, and also as educational tools that will keep the old ways alive. Enthusiast circles who do track days and driving schools and classic car meetups, they're gonna be the people who preserve these skills and just that appreciation for, driving a manual. I think it's important also to note the rise of analog appreciation across really all hobbies, whether it's film, photography, vinyl records, mechanical watches. These things tell us that the world goes digital, but then there's often a counter movement that values what is tactile and even imperfect. If you know anything about watch history, you know that our current situation with cars and with the rise of EVs is similar to the quartz crisis for mechanical watchmakers in the 70s. In the end, there was a place for mechanical watches. They didn't just end up museum pieces, and I think that'll be even more so true for cars. I will say too that there's hope in the unexpected. As electric vehicles dominate, some companies and tuners are already experimenting with ways to simulate or even mechanically integrate gearboxes into EV platforms. Now, that might sound like heresy to some of you. I'm not entirely sure what I think about it. But, to others it would be viewed as progress. But it gives people a way to feel more involved, to learn, and to connect again with that experience of driving. So it might be the evolution that manuals need. So no, the manual transmission isn't going to come back in a big way. It's never going to be mainstream again, but I do think it'll survive because for some of us, driving isn't just about getting from A to B. It's about everything in between. And as long as there are people who care about that, then the manual transmission will never die. So get out and drive something with a clutch before they do potentially all end up museum pieces. All right, we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Drive safe.
Yeah. That's why it's just automatic's just kind of better for some people, most rather. Yeah. Still wish they taught me that during driving school, but oh well. But yeah, that was it. Thank you all for watching. Hope you all enjoy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, I am going to do Doing the Dark Age. It just might take a while, so yeah. Bye.